All right. Welcome everyone to our last Westchester CAPI cohort meeting of the year. Hard to believe, but we are winding up for the year. And we have, I think, an exciting agenda today. We're going to start off with a guest speaker. We have with us today Anne-Marie Cleary-Rauker from ICLEI. She's in their climate communications department, and she's going to be speaking to us about climate communications. And then we're going to move into a small group communications role-playing exercise, which I think will be a lot of fun. And then we will return to the larger group, report on how that went. And then Caroline is going to lead us through a emissions reduction measure modeling example exercise. And then I'll wrap up with some climate action plan template considerations and homework and such. So with that, I want again to welcome Anne-Marie and thank her for joining us. And Anne-Marie, if you would like to share your screen, you can do so, and I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, awesome. Can everyone see that all right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks for the yes and the head nods. I always get nervous with technology, you know. All right. So hello. It's great to meet you all. And today we're going to go through about 20 minutes or so about kind of communications and then leave room for questions. So I want to show you a little bit about the agenda. So it is quite a bit of content, and I recognize that. So if you have any questions, like feel free to just like raise your hand or put it in the chat. Let me know if you have anything, popping up as we go through all this content. So to start the conversation, I definitely want to make sure we do kind of communications 101. So we're all on the same page, kind of moving forward with this. And then I'm going to share some best practices with climate and sustainability storytelling, as well as some awesome examples that you can kind of think about that in terms of your climate action plans or, any other, products that you may have, as well as, what I like to call the ingredients of a good communications plan. So again, you can apply that to your CAP template or, anything else you're working on. And also just a great resource for kind of a messaging checklist. And on that note, I will jump into it. So let's talk about communications kind of 101. So this equation is what I like to call like all the goodies you need for good communication. So we're going to be going over all these pieces today, but of course you need to start off with having a goal in mind whenever you have a communications product. You also need to consider who is your audience. We'll talk a little bit more about that in detail, but there is an audience journey. So you're going to have different folks, like different stakeholders or residents, on a different like kind of journey of where they are engaging with your material. Another key aspect of this is a unique value proposition. So it's kind of about like, why would people care? Like, what is important about this? You always want to have that in the back of your mind. And of course, you need to consider all of your channels, after the pandemic. I mean, we're still in the pandemic, but we're kind of in a digital world like we are right now. It's always important to note that you have those in-person options as well, and like physical copies, brochures, items like that. So it's really key to know that there's different channels and you can meet people where they are, right? So depending on your audience, some folks may be on social media, some people may not. So just keeping that in mind. And then of course you need to have high-level insights that are backed by credible sources. So it's like kind of the communications equation that you always want to keep in the back of your mind for good and effective, interesting, funny, life-changing, you would like to think, communications. So talking a little bit more about communication goals, as sustainability staff, I think it's really important to note that y'all exist kind of in the field more specifically of climate sustainability communications. But within communications, there's also this field of like science communication. So these bullet points are kind of summarizing the general goals you see kind of come out of both of these fields of practice. And you can see there's a little bit of overlap, right? There's both the lens about awareness and understanding, but I think it's really important to know that in the world that you're working in, climate sustainability communications, your goals will be more geared towards, engaging, informing, advocating, and mobilizing folks with your sustainability and climate change initiatives. So kind of keep some goals you might have in mind for your CAP. Now, a little bit more about the audience journey. So this is kind of all about how folks, you want to move them up this staircase, right? You're going to start with this general awareness about your initiative, but you want to move them up to advocacy, right? You want them to be champions of what you're working on. But it's important to note that folks will be at different stages, right? A really great resource is actually Yale's Climate Change Communications Department. They have something called the Global Warming Six Americas. And I believe my colleague Caroline might drop that link in the chat, but they describe in the US, there's like 6 different types of folks and how they engage with global warming, how they talk about it. And there's a lot of great studies. So you can kind of zoom in on their map there and like kind of explore your community, what folks are saying, like things like, do you talk about global warming with your family? Yes or no? You know, things like that. But audience journey is really important to kind of keep in mind. And later on, I'm going to show you how different communication products kind of fall along this journey and how you can utilize your CAP to break down that information as well. And then just a small note of defining success. I think it's really important, right? You have a goal in mind, you know who your audience is, but how do you measure success? So you want to make sure you have SMART goals. I'm sure you've heard that acronym: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. But mainly, it's just really important to make sure if you have a goal in mind, perhaps it's you want 20% of your residents to change out their light bulbs to be LEDs. You know, how are you measuring that? How do you ensure that? Is that in an appropriate time frame? Items like that. For example, communications, you could say you want to have 3,000 people subscribe to your newsletter. What's your time frame? What does that look like? And then just an important note that within communications and defining success, flexibility is key, right? So you might try different products, different platforms, and folks may not resonate with it. So you just have to be able to pivot and kind of meet people where they are. So now we're gonna get into the best practices of climate and sustainability storytelling. So first and foremost, you want to start with people and you want to stay with people. So at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're honing in why and how climate change is impacting your community, those people specifically. Can turn into a global conversation, but really honing in on like specifically residents, using people-centered photos like this one here, like elicits more, emotional responses than other items. So that kind of brings up this conversation about how we need to swap moral appeals for appeals to local values. And what I mean by that is, like, if you can think of like a classic ad about climate change, you can envision it, right? It's like a sad polar bear on a tiny iceberg that's slowly melting, right? But there's been a lot of studies done that show that that actually elicits a lot of hopelessness in individuals. So it's kind of this conversation about, instead of trying to tap into those moral appeals and assuming everyone is an environmentalist, and tapping more into these local values. And what I mean by that is tapping into things like public health, security, quality of life, like the landscape. So you can make cases such as talking about public health concerns with poor air quality. You can talk about the economic benefits of taking climate action versus the cost of climate inaction. You can talk about effects of recreational areas within your community as well. And this is another great resource here. It's called Making Climate Communications Less Awful. That link will be dropped in the chat as well. Really good examples of like how to use those local values, or I call them place-based identities. Might say that later on. Next up is a really important conversation about bringing forward the right messengers or characters. So we're going to have a little bit of a throwback. I'm going to bring you back to maybe like 7th or 8th grade in your English class. So maybe this is ringing a bell for you. This graphic is explaining the art of creating a story. So with your climate action plan, you kind of need to view it in this way as well. Like, you need to set the context, you need to bring the characters forward and talk about the different issues, and ultimately, the resolution, which is, the steps and strategies you're going to take to help create your vision of your ideal community. And I think a key part of storytelling is having those correct messengers, right? Because different people will resonate with different folks. So kind of getting a little bit more into that is this list. So there's definitely more individuals you can probably brainstorm that you're like, these are better messengers for my community, but these are in general what I've seen used within like local governments as messengers. So bringing for the right messenger not only helps with your storytelling, but it also develops trust, right? That's a really key thing as a local government. You want to continue to build trust and credibility with your community. And you can do that by utilizing different messengers. So on the left-hand side is kind of the traditional sense, right? You have your elected officials, public works, public health staff. You all know those people pretty well, right? But I think on the right-hand side of the area that people sometimes overlook, and I think it's specifically community organizers and youth. So I think developing really great relationships with community organizers can really help, especially if you want to have a little bit more community buy-in. You can get insights with place-based priorities, Same thing with the youth. It's a really good lens for advocacy, community impact, and such. And for example, actually tomorrow, yes, tomorrow's the 8th, COP28, it's Youth Day. So definitely stay tuned on Equity channels or other channels that you follow. Youth will have a really good voice there. And I think it's a great example of bringing forward the right messengers and sharing like the future generations we all talk about saving the planet for, let them have a voice as well. So these are great examples to have for messengers. And I'll have some examples a little bit later on how you could utilize their voice within your climate action plan. And then just a good note here is that as your mission as local government staff, as you choose and accept it, is to protect and serve. So it's really important within your language when you're writing your climate action plan. So it's having that kind of powerful messaging. So this is another great resource. It's called Let's Talk Communities. It's by Eco America and Eco USA. It's just kind of showing how we need to change our language from saying good for the country, say good for your city, right? It's coming back to those local values and kind of tapping into those kind of frameworks as well. Thank you, Caroline. I appreciate you putting those in the chat. So yes, definitely recommend you explore those. There's huge tables on it. These are just like the top 3 I pulled for this presentation. So questions that I would love for you all to keep in mind now, and if there's time later on, we can talk about it, or feel free to like put your thoughts in the chat as well. But before we move on to the next section of this presentation, I want you to think about what is your current sustainability story? So you can think about like on your homepage, like in your department, what are you sharing? And secondly, like how would you add local value to your sustainability storytelling? Maybe you're already doing that. So you can kind of think about how you've done that and consider ways to amplify that. And lastly, I'd love for you to consider about who are the right messengers. Is it always the elected official in your community? Or maybe it's a youth group. Maybe it's folks from your community college, maybe it's considered creating a youth climate council, have youth ambassadors, things like that to like help elevate what amazing work you're doing and who can you work with to elevate. So with that in mind, I want to jump into some great examples that you could consider for your CAPs or any kind of, communications. So to start off, I have 3 examples specifically showing you how to utilize data, right? There's an art to data storytelling. I'll just jump in with an example. Here's a great example, right? This is a graph that's showing natural gas consumption versus electricity consumption. You can imagine this being like several bar graphs, right? And what you want to do when you're communicating data, you want to tell a story to back up why you're doing certain initiatives. So you want to put a minimal amount of lift for someone to be able to look at a graph and be like, what's the takeaway? But with this one, you can quickly look at it and be like, hey, December, January, and February is super high. So then you would chime in, okay, that's why we have this program. That's why we're doing this initiative because of this. And then you can tie it into the greenhouse gas effect, things like that. So you want to use data to help tell your story, but in a like kind of an effective manner. So it's not, overwhelming. So another great example of doing that is actually through infographics. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but the Sustainable Development Goals on the United Nations website, they have actually infographics for every single SDG. Again, this may not be applicable for what you're working on within your CAP, but I think it's a great visual aid of showing how they're using data, but visualizing it in a way to tell a story and about why it is important to end hunger. I think we all know why, but it's a great way to visualize it and show those impacts across the world. Of course, as a local community, you want to make this as place-based as possible. Next up is actually my favorite. It is, I think Caroline dropped it in the chat. If not, I'll drop it later. There's this amazing resource that actually shows how you can explain heat maps in a little bit more of an effective manner. So if you think of a traditional heat map, it's like red is super hot, but that's really hard to comprehend, right? You're like, well, what does that feel like? I get it's going to be toasty. So this resource here actually shows what the climate will feel like in one area in 60 years compared to a current community. So this is kind of showing how in Poughkeepsie, what it's going to feel like in 6 years is actually currently how it feels in Missouri. So it's a really good way to kind of show, kind of connecting those weather. I mean, maybe not everyone's been to Missouri, right? But it's a great example instead of just saying, hey, it's getting really toasty. So you're kind of making it, again, more place-based. You're using data, but explaining in a way that has impact. So definitely recommend checking that out. Thank you, Caroline. That's in the chat. Again, it's called What Will Climate Feel Like in 60 Years? And it doesn't have dots everywhere, but you can definitely explore and use other areas that might relate to your community as a kind of starting point for talking about heat. Okay, this is where I'm going to shift a little bit more about recommendations of how you kind of frame your climate action plan. So as we talk about like with technical staff, you always want to be like, okay, we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 63% by 2030 and be carbon neutral by 2050. That can mean a lot to certain folks that are further along, right, on that audience journey. But for folks that are just learning, it's kind of like, what? What are you saying to me? So what I really recommend is starting with a climate action plan, and actually really any product, is to make sure you have more of like a vision statement and have a conversation about what is your ideal community look like, and then tie that into your greenhouse gas reduction, right? So a really great example of this is actually by the city of Baltimore. I believe it's their sustainability plan from 2018. And what they did is they hosted a public engagement forum and had people come forward to share what do they commit to, right? Like I commit to racial equity. I commit to caring for our natural world. So that was a really great way to not only bring people forward and use those right messengers, but also help with creating that kind of that visioning statement of what is an ideal community. And then how does that tie into greenhouse gas emissions, resilience, adaptation, all those goodies. And that's like just a good example of a kind of storytelling within that framework. Another great example, which Caroline can drop in the chat, it's the city of Jersey City. I was going to say city of Jersey City. Anyways, they created a really cool program with engaging their community members. So with a climate action plan, you have to write, you need to include those great messengers, you need to write an active voice, all those good things, right? Those are great practices, but you're going to need photos. And the best way to do photos is actually to engage your community members, and you can run a sustainability photo contest. So Jersey City specifically asked members, hey, what does sustainability look like to you in our community? And folks took photos, and then they had winners. So again, you're bringing community members within your climate action plan. You're getting great photos that represent, you're not using stock images. It's a great way to kind of engage with the public. In addition to this, they actually did community voices. So it was a great way of them highlighting, again, some of those messengers and explaining why the climate action plan is important, their involvement with it. And again, it's bringing that people-centered approach front and center within their climate action plan. So definitely recommend that. And then I'll be brief on this, and Caroline will drop these in chat, but really good examples if you're looking for how other cities are kind of communicating in general. City of Cincinnati has a really strong X/Twitter channel, a lot of storytelling, a lot of graphics. City of Fort Collins, Colorado has a really good newsletter, several newsletters. So they're specific topics, they're accessible, and they're bilingual. So definitely recommend that. Like that's a really gold standard. And it just kind of, again, depends on capacity and staffing, but really great examples there. Okay, and we're going to get into kind of the goodies of ingredients of a climate action plan. So I just want to bring us back to that audience journey. Again, you're going to have folks at different steps on this staircase, and it's going to kind of depend on your community. You know them best, you'll know where they'll be at, but it's important to note that I'm going to show you, there's different products that will be along this staircase that you can kind of develop. But I want to do an example of what is a comms plan. So there's quite a few elements to a comms plan, but I'm going to do it kind of through an example. So this is an example of Darien Cities 2020. It was a global climate event kind of in response kind of to the pandemic and trying to keep the conversations about climate action going. So within this framework, when you have a comms plan, you need to have those goals outlined, right? And you need to know your audience. But again, you're going to have different goals depending on your audience and what you're wanting them to achieve. You can have one to several unique value propositions about why is this important. You can consider multiple channels, as well as like, what is the big insight fact that you're trying to relay? And maybe that's, we're reducing emissions by 63% by 2030, things like that. So Darien Cities specifically, you can see on the right side there, that's all of the kind of some products that were produced for it. Always want to note, you want to make sure your branding is on par with what we already have. So connecting with the comms team, or if you are also the comms person, you'll know your branding. You want it to be a cohesive product with your CAP and other things you see from your local government. So again, Darien Cities is really about creating a city climate space and motivate folks to engage. The audience was specifically local and regional governments. Unique value proposition was really that cities are continuing to fight even during the pandemic, there was multiple channels. It was Google ads. It's like working with partner organizations, social media, website, newsletters, items like that. And then the main insight was that people are hungry for ways to connect and they want to see what's happening on the ground virtually. So definitely a great example. Would recommend kind of filling out those yellow bits there for your own CAP plan. And then the next element are questions that you also need to consider with your comms plan. What are the main messages that you want that are, related to the goals that you want to use as part of this plan? Who are the stakeholders and partners that are going to be involved in the plan? Again, it's that conversation about who are the right messengers. And then, of course, with any good project plan management, who is responsible for what, who's doing other elements. You want to make sure you have a timeline and deadlines and what are they contingent on. Again, I always recommend having backup plans because, things can happen. So making sure that's a part of your comms plan as well. And of course, kind of back to that conversation is like, what is success or how do you define success? So you want to make sure you have results and metrics so you can understand that and be tracking that either through like your website metrics, bounce rates, things like that as well. So coming back to the audience journey, this is just what I want to show. That you can do a lot of things with your climate action plan. You can break it into different content and how this can reach an array of folks. So on the left side of that staircase, that's own content, right? So that's something you produce, right? You have around the advocacy lens, you have that report, maybe a climate action plan. And that may not engage with folks that are just trying to do like awareness. So that's why you need to also have Twitter, social media posts, press release, events, things like that. And I think it's really important to also note that by having this own content, you're actually going to have earned content, right? So people are going to pick up on what's going on within your community. And that's through news articles, social shares, influencer content, testimonials, maybe you'll have speaking engagements. So it's all kind of interconnected. So I know writing a climate action plan or any communication deliverable can be hefty and a lot, but just know that all that information you have in there, you can break it down into different information. So for example, what I've done at ICLEI is when we have bigger products, I can turn them into fact sheets. I turn them into social media posts. I create blog posts and different styles of content on different channels because the goal is to meet people where they are but ultimately funneling people back to the original report or the original climate action plan. So just keep that in mind that creating this, you're going to have lots of amazing content that you can use to reach everyone that's on their audience journey at different steps. And then bear with me, we're going to go through an example of daring cities, and it's a lot of animations, but I just want to give you kind of more of like a concrete example of the audience journey and those like products. So the goal of daring cities at the end of the day was right here on that adoption line. What we wanted is folks to attend daring cities or DC, that event. So you'll see different color coding. I just want to call it out. We have ICLEI channels that will be in yellow, and then daring cities channels that will be in dark blue, and then earn channels in light blue. So to start off from ICLEI, since we're running this event, we created a bunch of social media posts, websites, press release, and blog posts. And then we received earned content such as like ads, articles, other items like that, as well as, opportunities to speak, social media posts, blog posts, words, and podcasts. All of that funneled into the DC website. So you can think about that for your local government. Everything you do regarding your climate action plan will funnel into your local government website. Perhaps you have a dedicated page for sustainability, things like that. All of those goodies will be there, which will ultimately, for DC, connected to our event registration, as well as creating a newsletter and social media channels, which all fed into event registration, which is what you need in order for folks to attend an event. So just kind of wanted to show that. I know it's a big thing, but that's, again, if you want to think about the staircase and lining up different products about what you're producing and where folks might engage most on your own terms with your CAP report, I think that'd be great, but just wanted to share that example. Oh, and also I always like to note that a lot of buildup when you're writing climate action plans or, again, any communication deliverable, you're like, the end is near, like we're going to publish it and I'm done. And I'm going to tell you this, that's not true. You want to keep it alive. You want to keep the conversations going. You want to circle back to it, have updates about what you're working on. You're probably going to update your climate action plan later on as well. So that's kind of the lens of always thinking about advocacy and thinking about how you can continually talk about it on social media or engage different messengers regarding it and all those good things. So just wanted to call that out. And then lastly, this is just my go-to messaging checklist whenever I'm developing any product. And this kind of summarizes everything that I just talked about for the last 20 minutes or so, but it's kind of, I'll run through it really quickly and then we'll end things and leave time for questions. But you want to think about, does your message, does your cap, again, does it come from the best messenger? Are we making sure that everyone's voices are at the table if people feel seen and heard? So we need to act as a community to take initiatives to meet our goals. You want to avoid too much jargon. You want to use easy to understand language. Great resource for that is actually, Grammarly or a Hemingway editor, because you do not want to use passive voice when you write. Studies have shown that people like kind of zone out. So if you can think of like a really technical paper about greenhouse gas emissions, usually that's written in passive voice. So you want to write an active voice, and Hemingway editor is a great way to like clock when you're writing in passive voice. You want to avoid that as much as possible. Also, you want to make sure you stick to a few key points and repeat them. So I always abide by the rule of 3. So have 3 call to actions, or CTAs, that you want folks to do for your climate action plan, or specifically one per section. And then of course, you want to make sure it's relating to why these issues matter. Why does it matter locally? Are you tying it to community values? Are you offering practical solutions? Always tying into economic terms. And last but not least, you want to reflect community input and identify key priorities. And on that note, I will stop talking and stop sharing the screen. So if folks have questions, feel free to raise your hand or unmute. I'm happy to answer, or just have a space to share about what your sustainability story is currently as well.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie. That was so interesting. And I might just jump in and kick it off with a question, because I'm curious, a lot of these actions, the sort of marketing actions are they're intuitive and they make a lot of sense. But I'm wondering how you track success. Like if you can talk a little bit more about, obviously you can look at hits to a website or how many people sign up for a newsletter or things like that, but maybe there's sort of more insight you could provide to how you measure success in your role and what you might recommend for the municipalities.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mary. So first off, I'd always recommend connecting with your comms department, because I'm sure they have some goals in terms of like communications, what you want to track. So within my role, I pretty much track as much as I can, because it depends again on your goal, right? So again, website, for example, of course, it's great to say, yes, we have a lot of people viewing the website. But what I find more insightful is, what are the top 3 pages? Is that your sustainability page? Look at the sustainability page. What is your bounce rate? Bounce rate is pretty much, do people click on your page and then leave immediately because they're not finding what they want to look for, right? So if you have a high bounce rate, that means folks are not seeing what they need. So that allows you, from a communication lens, to be like, okay, everyone's leaving this page about EVs. What's going on? So what you can do is then assess your copy and be like, okay, let's rewrite it. Maybe it's too copy heavy. Maybe it's, too many photos. Maybe people are just looking for a form to fill out for something. So it's being able to kind of look at those stats, so then you can adjust your content accordingly. So communication is all about, being flexible and being able to use those metrics to be like, hey, this is testing well, or this is testing so bad. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's rework this website page, or, rewrite the copy. So I think I'm trying to think of other good examples. So mainly I would say it depends on where you plan on hosting your climate action plan. But again, looking at that website page, the bounce rate is really important. How long are people on that page? You want folks to be reading your content. Social media posts is something that I often examine. I have campaigns, so I try different styles. So it's like, do people like testimonials more? Do people prefer videos? Do people just like simple tweets or X's? I don't know what we're going to call it now with it being called X, but things like that. So making sure you're, just doing different content and testing it out, such as like view rates, click rates, kind of things like that is always what I, recommend. Or for example, webinars or in-person events, I think it's really important to note how many people registered and then how many people actually showed up. So you can kind of see those differences. So then you can then critically go back to the drawing board, like, hey, a lot of people registered, but no one came. Maybe we didn't offer it at a good time. Maybe we didn't offer stipends. Maybe there's a language barrier and we need to have translators, like kind of things like that. So Hope that answered your question.
Yes, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. And also just for the participants, I am going to put all of the links that Anne-Marie provided on the website. So you can find them there. Any other questions?
Yeah, just one question, Anne-Marie. You mentioned Google Ads as an avenue for outreach, and that's the first time I've heard that mentioned. I always thought Google Ads were national, not local, but I guess you can target them to local audiences.
Yes, you can. So it's definitely, I would look into it. There are sometimes Google offers like 10 to 20K free for like specifically nonprofits. There might be like a situation where you could purchase more for local governments. But yes, it's a little bit of an art of SEO, which is search engine optimization. And then also just knowing the folks that you're trying to target for a program. So you use really specific key phrases. So then it would pop up on their feed. But any, interest in Google Ads, I always recommend connecting with a comms expert, because if you go astray with Google Ads, it can ruin your SEO to like actually your website, which is the last thing you want, right? So always make sure you connect with folks with that. Or there's also like consulting firms that offer, resources to assist with like running those Google Ads. Or any advertising on social media, like LinkedIn is a great place. I wouldn't recommend Twitter/X. You can on Instagram, but I think LinkedIn is a great way, especially if you're wanting to, amplify CAPs or job postings, things like that.
Right, and we have a village website. We also have an environmental council website. People are used to going to the latter, I think, for environmental related issues. Would that be the place we would put, pages related to the CAP for the public, I guess, later on?
Yeah, I would recommend looking at which one has the best metrics. So who, like looking at how many folks are going to which, because you want the widest array, like, right. I assume that's your goal. You want everyone to see it. I think if it's possible to host it on both. But I think if it's your goal, again, it just depends on your community. I would recommend putting it on that main web page in the sense of linking to your environmental page. So you want to increase traffic to your environmental page, because if that's the hub that people need to go to hear updates about CAP, other programs and resources, make sure you're ultimately connecting to that page in that way.
All right, anyone else? Okay, well, thank you so much, Anne-Marie. That was really interesting, and really appreciate your time. And again, I'll have all those resources on the website. And I don't know, Anne-Marie, if you're willing to provide your email address, if anyone has any follow-up questions, that would be great.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love talking about communications, and I also know it's like so specific to your community and where you're at on this journey. So yeah, I'm happy to drop that in the chat. Feel free to email me.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again. So now we're going to pivot slightly to communications of a different sort. We are going to talk about communications with stakeholders. And I think some of actually a lot of what Anne-Marie talked about is relevant here as well. But it is also important, I think, to think about some of the actual stakeholders that you're going to be dealing with. So Caroline and Kayla and I brainstormed some ideas for what it's like actually interfacing with stakeholders, and we came up with some profiles. So now I'm going to share my screen if I can get to the right screen here, and then we can talk more about that. Okay, and we're going to jump into a role-playing exercise to kind of bring this point home. So just as some background, this role-playing exercise is one where we're going to imagine we're presenting to our GoCap strategies to stakeholders. So all cohort members will be taking turns playing the role of presenter and also the role of stakeholder. And this is an opportunity to further review your recommended strategies, to practice climate communications and answer challenging questions, discuss reactions, challenges, and next steps, and brainstorm more effective answers and rebuttal. So what I did was I input a sample climate action plan, just the high level sort of headings, into ChatGPT. And I asked ChatGPT what a climate denier might think about this climate action plan. And I did it for 5 different profiles. And I don't know how many of you have experience with ChatGPT, but I've become somewhat obsessed with it. It's fascinating what comes up. And so I've copy and pasted some of the questions and feedback and pushback that these different profiles of stakeholders said through ChatGPT. So, for instance, a climate denier. What would a climate denier potentially say about your climate action plan? I'm just going to read a couple of these for each of them, but you can go back and read through it if you're interested. Again, I thought ChatGPT did a particularly good job of coming up with good pushback and good questions. So first one, I think climate change is uncertain and often exaggerated. What evidence exists that this climate action plan is scientifically accurate in its assumptions about climate change? How can the town trustees and the mayor unanimously approve such a plan without allowing for dissenting voices and alternative scientific perspectives? So that's the climate denier. Then we have the activists, right? This is someone who, generally wants more things done more quickly. So for instance, what specific measures are being taken within this climate action plan to ensure equitable access to its benefits for all communities, especially those historically marginalized or disproportionately affected by environmental issues? How will the city council monitor and ensure accountability in the implementation of this plan to guarantee that the outlined goals are met by 2030? And so just so you know, the reason we're going through these is because you all are going to be in the position of asking these types of questions to your cohort members. So, so hopefully you're kind of digesting this, and you can wear these different hats in the small group breakout after this, in this role-playing exercise. So a fiscal conservative might ask, what are the projected costs associated with transitioning to the electrification of municipal facilities and fleet? Has the city council conducted a thorough cost-benefit analysis to determine the economic feasibility of such recommendations, considering potential tax implications or budget cuts in other critical areas? So if you know who in your group, which stakeholders potentially would ask these type of questions before you go into the meeting, obviously it's really helpful in preparing responses to these questions. So that's why we're going to walk through this, and hopefully it will be helpful. So an enthusiastic newbie might ask, why isn't there mention of a community-wide recycling campaign in this plan? I'd really like the town to consider prioritizing the purchase of new residential bins that don't leak. Let's have an all-day event and tell the town staff about the superiority of building rain gardens. How soon can we send a staff survey? So again, this is someone who has a lot of great energy and enthusiasm, but maybe isn't so aware of what the goals of a government operations climate action plan are, and is maybe a little unrealistic. For some reason, ChatGPT had a lot to say on the naysayer pessimist. Kind of interesting. So again, I'll just read the first couple ones, but fascinating kind of what kinds of things come out when you type this into ChatGPT. How can the town realistically achieve the ambitious goal of 40% GHG emissions reductions by 2030 when so much of it's dependent on transitioning the grid to renewable energy in such a relatively short time frame? We already have a comprehensive plan and an energy audit. Why do we need this plan? Okay, so you guys get the gist, hopefully. And I would ask you to link to this. This is a link, actually, and if you could click on it, hopefully it will take you to the summary of the recommended strategies that we discussed at the last meeting. So each of you has already come up with a draft list of recommended strategies, and those are the strategies that you're going to be recommending to the group. So if you can click on this link, hopefully it works, you can see what strategies you recommended, just as a refresher.
The link isn't accessible as a share.
It's not. Okay. All right. Well, then I'll have to, I'll put it in the chat. Yeah. Let me just do that quickly before we move on, because I don't want to, I want to make sure you guys can all open this in time for the Okay, hopefully you can see that in the chat now. Can you guys just confirm that you got that in the chat?
Yep, all good.
Perfect, thank you. Okay. So these are the groups. I'm not sure, I know a few people had to drop off early, but we are going to resume the groups that we broke out into before. So hopefully these should be familiar. And I've assigned everyone to these groups. So in a moment we will break out. So again, the directions, we're going to move into breakout rooms. You should first decide in your small group who's going to be a note taker and timekeeper. Then choose the order of presenters. So each municipality will present to the stakeholders on the recommended strategies. That should be 3 to 5 minutes. And then there's a 3 to 5 minute Q&A. So the questions from these pretend stakeholders will mimic the kinds of questions that I just went over, right? Fiscal conservative questions, activist questions, so that the presenter can have an opportunity to practice responding to those challenging questions. And this is this is not going to be easy. I know some of these questions are really challenging, and I don't think any of us really have a perfect answer for any of them, but hopefully together we can learn from each other and improve our presentations and our reply to questions based on this experience. And then lastly, step 5, just if you could leave 5 to 10 minutes or what remaining time you have to talk about your experience with this exercise. So what did you learn? What was challenging? What do you need to work on kind of moving forward? So this will be a total of 30 minutes that will be in the breakout rooms for. And after 30 minutes, we'll return to the larger group and we'll talk about what we've learned and tips and anything else you wish to share with the group. Okay, so that is it for me. Are there any questions before we jump into the groups? No. Okay.
Can you leave that list of how we're gonna conduct this up there so we can refer to that, or maybe we should copy it off.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to be able to see it when you go into the breakout rooms.
Right,
I can hop into the breakout rooms and share it with you all, but
well, if you could just put it back up there so I can
sure,
screen
yeah.
that.
Yep, let me do that.
Anne Marie and I also have it a screenshot of the direction slide, so we can share those in the groups that we're managing.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, I got it. Okay, good.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we will see you back in the larger group in 30 minutes or so.
Involved in this, and Kate, do you have familiarity with the plan? All right, well, wait.
I've only been attending the meetings when I can. I have not been attending consistently in the last couple of months because I've had to teach during the times that the meetings have been conducted. So I know Maddie has been doing a lot of work on this. Unfortunately, Maddie's not here. She actually would have more knowledge on this than I would. I didn't even see that list until just now.
Hi guys, yeah, sorry about that, Kate and Katie. I realize this is going to be difficult for the Village of Ossining, but I can put the why don't you all go last, and I can put the list up of actions that Maddie had recommended, and you don't have to go through all of them. Maybe you can just pick a few that you're more comfortable with, and yeah, and we can just go from there. But totally understand that this is all new to you, so no expectations. And I'm here to help you guys if you want. I do know the list of directions pretty well. So I think the first step was to find a note taker and a timekeeper. That can be the same person if anyone wants to volunteer for that, or I'm happy to do it as well. All right, why don't I just do it? That's totally
I
fine.
don't take good notes.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to report back to the group per se. I think it's more just a discussion. So if you guys want to just jot down any kind of lessons learned or challenges or things that you thought were interesting to share with the larger group while we're talking, then anyone can talk at the when we come back into the larger group. I think the timekeeping is kind of more important to make sure everyone does have a chance to present. So I'm happy to do that. And I can I can share the list with everyone so you guys can see again what strategies you came up with before. I would also say, and I should have said this to the larger group too, that of course if you have changed your mind since you did this exercise, or you're thinking now that you don't want to necessarily recommend all these things, you can obviously change this list. It's definitely certainly a exercise in motion and in progress, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, no worries if you decide you want to change what I put up. But who would like to volunteer first? I guess we have Village and Town of Austining as well as Terrytown.
I don't know, Lisa, do you want to go and talk about Terrytown's potential actions?
Sure. Okay. So, and just to clarify for Dean, this was part of because in Terrytown, we have our first meeting with our climate action planning task force next week. So we haven't discussed the strategies. So I just want Dean to know that these strategies came from an exercise in the last meeting based on our what we know of our emissions inventory. So
okay. And sorry, Alyssa, I don't know if you can see my screen, but I just want to make sure that everyone sees it, or you see, most importantly, that the first column is will probably recommend and the second column is may recommend. So these were the ones that you came up with.
Right. So I just want to clarify, I know maybe this was part of the homework, but I didn't prepare any kind of presentation or anything on this, but I'll just talk through it. Okay.
Yep,
so
this is totally casual, like no presentation was necessary.
Okay. Yeah. So based on our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, Terrytown's primary emissions vehicle is through its buildings and facilities. Its second is vehicle fleet. And so those are the two areas that we need to concentrate on for taking action. So among the actions that we will likely take, we will take a look at our village facilities but I don't know that this is accurately reflecting what we said at that meeting. I'm just going to say, because I know that we're likely going to be upgrading our HVAC or our heat.
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry if they're not accurate. It was kind of hard to tell. There was a column that was like already done or maybe. So I couldn't tell like if it was already done or you were considering it. So I apologize if this is.
Anyway, likely we will be conducting an energy audit, or at our facilities, we will likely be upgrading our senior center and DPW garage heating and HVAC equipment. We will be taking a look at installing EV infrastructure. I'm sorry, I did not prepare for this, so but anyway,
you don't have to do them all either. If you want to answer questions, that's fine.
Okay.
If there's anything you feel like particularly excited about, maybe you can focus on that, or if you just want to answer questions, that's fine too.
Yeah. I mean, I guess everybody can take a look at these, and then why don't you ask me questions from your, I think that would be an easier,
Yeah, no, I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I feel like probably the most common, in my experience, the most common types of questions are the ones coming from the fiscal conservative crew.
Yeah, you know what? This is not at all reflecting what we said, because I did not want to do food scrap recycling at village facilities. Because I didn't, so this is not at
Okay.
all,
Okay,
yeah,
Got
reflecting
rid of that.
accurately. So
So,
I'm
so
not
let's,
sure.
let's
so
cross
let's
that
just
off.
focus on the fleet efficiency and the building
Yeah,
efficiency, building improvements.
yeah. So I think most likely knowing how, what we're emitting, yes to interior LED lights, that's an absolute. So I think it must be flipped. I think the columns are flipped is what I'm thinking. Yes to interior LED lights, yes to upgrading our HVAC and our heating equipment. Yes to upgrading our energy management system. We're already working on that. Yes to installing solar panels. So I think this is flipped for us.
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
Right sizing the vehicle fleet, I think, is a maybe, actually. Incentivizing low emission commutes. I took a picture actually, so I can look back at my notes.
Yeah,
but
all of the pictures are on the website as well, so.
yeah.
Go back.
So if I want to play devil's advocate here, I would say and the role of a fiscal conservative, I would say this is really, making these changes is really going to raise our taxes. So, is there some assurance that the village is going to be able to do this within the time frame needed, and it isn't going to cause real problems for tax-paying citizens in our village infrastructure, village taxes? Or is there going to be a bond or something to finance this stuff? Is it going to be done by grants?
Right. So thank you for the question. So the important thing to understand is these projects are not going to happen all at once. We can't possibly do everything in the same year. And so this will happen, the idea here is we're going to approach these efforts over time. In the immediate, we know that there are some requirements where we have aging equipment that needs to be upgraded anyway. So at our DPW garage, for instance, we know that we're wasting a lot of money by not having an efficient system. So not only is it a problem for greenhouse gas emissions, but it's a problem for very high energy costs, exponentially above, for instance, most of our other facilities. So that is something we might prioritize. It will be likely be costly, but also be cost savings, and is really necessary anyway. Other efforts such as interior LED lights, we've actually already gotten a proposal from a consultant that shows that just in 6 years, this effort will pay for itself. And so again, these are not only helping with our emissions, but our cost savings to the village over time.
Great answer.
I'll throw another one out at you. I heard, I saw other communities. I'm playing the activist now. I've seen other communities that have covered their parking lots with solar panels, like White Plains, and it seems to be doing a lot of good for increasing the amount of green infrastructure and reducing carbon usage in the community. How come Terrytown doesn't have solar panels on its parking lots by the train station? Shouldn't we do that?
So that is something that we have explored and we wanted to do. However, when push comes to shove, our train station is right next to the river. And that's a place we're also in the middle of a climate adaptive design studio project to take a look at how we want to use our waterfront. And over again, we hear from residents of how they want to take advantage of the green spaces at the waterfront. Unfortunately, our parking lots, if we were to put solar panels on them, that would disrupt any ability to, for instance, add new recreational opportunities along the waterfront. Likely, also, as you can imagine, the view shed would be impacted, and that is an issue for everybody. So we think it would be better to explore reaching out to private entities in our village that have a lot of parking lots on Route 119, places not near our waterfront. And they should definitely, and equally could benefit from installing solar panels in locations like that.
Great.
Sounds
How
good.
about recycling? I really think there should be a recycling program, and I don't see that anywhere here. There are lots of leaky containers. I know we have one in our backyard, and
Yeah.
the village provided it for us, but it's not working properly.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
actually
so-
become an issue here in reality.
Our climate action plan here is for government operations, and because waste, recycling trash is such a small fraction of the emissions for our government operations, we actually didn't even include it in our plan. It is something that we can track, but it is not where we want to put our resources, where for this particular plan. We think it's more valuable in terms of both emissions reducing and cost savings to tackle some other issues. And you can only do so much, really. You have to focus on what has the most impact.
Awesome. All right, well, that was actually 10 minutes. So I don't know if someone else wants to go next. Maybe the town of Tarrytown, the town of Ossining would agree to go next.
I would love to, except for the fact that I still don't know what I'm doing.
No worries, Paige. Let's look at yours.
I've only been in this position and with the town for a month, and so I'm still trying to figure out how to take care of vouchers and do the rest of my job.
No worries. I totally get it. And I forgot that you're so new too, of course. So so no worries. One of the things you can, if you want, maybe you can just talk about some of these things that we talked about. And now, of course, I'm feeling a little nervous that these aren't correct. So but I do have a list here of the kinds of the things that you guys came up with last time.
David, you could
Yeah,
probably
David was
do this,
here.
right?
Yeah, I could talk to some of this. I think, a lot of this is having discussed it further with Liz and gone through it. There are a number of things here that were put in that perhaps are not actually functional answers, shall we say, in terms of what the town could do or is interested in doing or has shown up through some research that we've done as being effective. Like recycled paper policy, I'm not sure if it's there or not, but I don't think it makes a material difference to the GoCap emissions, frankly. Fleet efficiency policy is one thing that we will be looking into. We're hoping for advanced vehicles, but at the current time, they are not cost efficient, and the rest of it depends on what the industry does rather than what the town of Ossining does. For gas-powered vehicles, there is some ability to either improve mileage, increasing the efficiency, or in some cases go to electric. But anything that's a heavy-duty application, apparently, from what I have heard, is not cost-effective at this point. I think that Liz tells me they looked at replacing some of the diesel equipment, and to move it to electric was like 3 times the price of just replacing the diesel vehicle. So I don't think there is a payback on that. It might be 20 years, but the vehicle's gone by that time. So it's hard to, so some of this is going to have to be what does the industry do to make these things possible? We would like to look into incenting low emissions commutes. I don't have any bright concrete ideas yet and haven't received any, but I think that is one of our high points. I think 36% of our emissions comes out of employee commute. So this is definitely a place that we would like to look into. The trick is to figure out a cost-effective methodology to make this happen. And I'm hoping that as we build our communications programs and start talking to the employees, we can maybe come up with some good ideas to actually make this happen. But it's a little complicated to, you know, our people commute from long distances well outside the area. There are no good public transportation answers, just looking at the zip codes. So one would have to, you would probably have to improve the fuel efficiency of the vehicles they drive. And how would you do that in a way that is cost effective to the village? Right, since it's a personal vehicle, they're not driving village vehicles, they're driving personal vehicles. So, you know, do you change their work schedules? Is that possible given what they do? All that kind of, but that is something we would look at. And then again, the fleet efficiency policy, there's already a concept in place that you always look toward electric vehicles when that's feasible. Certainly inherently, most vehicles have improved fuel efficiency just by their nature as time has passed. So that will sort of de facto improve it as we replace vehicles. And those are probably the two big ones. The other one was looking, well, we don't really have buildings. So all the building-based answers are not really meaningful. We have a single building, which is our senior center, not a huge energy consumption there. I have somewhere, hang on. Yeah, buildings as a whole represent only 10% of the emissions, the government emissions. Fleet efficiency is the big answer. And for the transit fleet, we've already changed to, what do you call those? Mixed power vehicles, shall we say. But you know, again, I'm sorry?
Hybrid vehicles, yeah.
Hybrid, yes. We've already moved to hybrid buses. So, and again, it's only 5% of our emissions. So this is not, you know, it's an improvement, but not a huge improvement. Between fleets and transit, employee transit, it's almost 80% of our emissions. So that will be the places that we are focused.
So David, can I ask, how are you going to pay for this? EVs are so expensive, so much more expensive than standard cars, and they're hard to find.
Well,
to tackle
that is absolutely true. And we are not going in for mass fleet replacement. As Alyssa mentioned, this is something that happens as vehicles need to be replaced anyway. So the base cost there is not super incremental. The difference in the electric vehicle cost for passenger grade vehicles is not hugely different, and probably, and you get the savings in fuel efficiency and not paying for the gasoline. Those costs will be going up in the near future, I'm pretty sure. And the electricity costs presumably will be coming down, so those will be saving money there.
Great. Awesome.
I would.
And we actually, our senior center, I believe, just bought 2 EV buses.
Wow. How did you pay for those? Do you remember, Paige? Was that?
No, when I
Okay.
say just, I mean in the last 6 months or so. So I think they're pre-me, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was going to mention there are also grant programs available that will help help offset the costs of EV purchases and EV charging as well.
I
Westchester
think we
County.
did something, I think we did something like that in the village for some of the police fleet. I think a couple of the cars, I know we switched over to electric vehicles for a couple of the police cars. I don't think we did the whole fleet, but I believe some of it may have been offset with some grant money through one of the programs.
Yeah.
Electric or hybrid? Because police
It
don't
may
usually
be,
want fully electrics.
maybe it is hybrid.
Uh,
But I know that there was something recently where it wasn't the whole fleet. I believe it was just a few cars and it was something they were rolling out. Because there are a couple of initiatives the village is trying to push forward, and we did get a lot of grant money through different programs that are going on right now. So it may be in connection to something else that's going on.
Well, I have a burning question for David, or for anybody actually, regarding employee commute. Would there ever be a possibility of the village adopting a policy that if there are two applications for a position and one is nearby and one is at a distance, that there might be some favoritism given to somebody who lives more locally and doesn't have to drive as far? I mean, is that a thorny issue? Is anybody would see that as something that there'd be a discrimination lawsuit against if that happened? I don't know.
I love it. It's a great idea.
It's a
Maybe
great
problematic.
idea. But I guess I certainly want the lawyers to vet it.
Most of our hires are regulated by the county civil service system and come off a list, and you have no control whatsoever over whether they're nearby, or you have to, it's a really ridiculous system, but you have to hire the top, you have to interview the top test scoring individuals, and the top 3, if they are interested in the position, you have to choose from among them. So you really, if the position is regulated by civil service, you have no control.
Yeah. Yeah, we had to do that with our library director, and she actually moved locally, which was good. But sometimes people aren't willing to do that.
I know we have gone off the list actually in Hastings, Alyssa, but it's an alternative process and there's some issues with it as well. So I agree. It is a little bit of an insane system.
Well, there are certain positions that you aren't required to use a list for. And yes, you have to find the title, the right title, but then the county has to approve that title. And
yeah.
So there's some flexibility with certain positions.
And I'm going to speak up from a different standpoint, which is considering the cost of living in our area, Austin, especially the town of Austining, village of Terrytown. It's sort of a justice issue to limit the employment of people who can't afford to live close to employment. And there's probably other ways to look at dealing with emissions that don't directly impact the ability of people to find work. You know, we may not have the answer right now, but I think we could be creative about finding other ways besides setting a boundary on where people could live. That's just a thought that popped into my head.
A good thought. I mean, another idea, Dean, perhaps, with a similar outcome, is to think about having the village subsidize either the purchase of or the leasing of an electric vehicle. Again, it's a cost.
Or provide more incentives for carpooling or using public transit where available. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm someone old enough to remember the gas crisis of the 70s and how suddenly all of us were carpooling when we had an incentive.
Yeah.
So we only have about 4 minutes left. I didn't know if the village of Austining wanted to.
I can play at it.
Yeah, go for it.
About the plan, but I do know about the issues, and unless Kate wants to do it, Kate, you want to do
it? Well, which one in particular? Because there's some things on here I don't know specifically what the village is intending to do, because I'm not part of the official government section of it. But from the Environmental Advisory Council standpoint, there are some things here that we've been proactive in helping with some of these plans that are being pushed forward. So I'm not sure exactly how.
Well, I was thinking of just treating this as a role-playing exercise, sort of an improv, to kind of get
Yeah, I'm
those.
not good at that.
Yeah, so I'm gonna give some of these a shot, and then maybe you
Okay.
jump in and give a couple of them. I'm gonna start with the I'm gonna make the assumption that the village has already done an energy audit of its buildings. And that one of the things that by following those directions, there's a way to not only save emissions, but even more importantly, to reduce the cost for our taxpayers. And one of the important ones is an energy management system. There's no reason to have lights on, to have to be heating spaces when there's nobody there. And it just makes common sense to install systems like these, especially when there are ways to do this in partnership with companies that will help us pay the first cost and pay it back from the savings. So this is something we're really actively pursuing. Upgrading LEDs is a similar almost no-brainer, because the cost of running them is so much lower than the cost of using old-fashioned light bulbs. And incentivizing low emission commutes is something that's worth looking at. But having a fleet efficiency policy, so that we know when we are sending out trucks, we're sending out trucks in the most efficient, low emissions way of doing it. And we want to make sure that we're not only coming up with a village that's good for the environment, but more importantly, good for our taxpayers' money. So, Kate, I know you've got some that you're enthusiastic about.
I know that we've done, as far as the energy management system, we have been, I believe it was Sustainable Westchester. We have collaborated with them. There are solar panels on our operations center now, so we are part of a savings program with them. We are trying to push forward with a natural resource inventory and open space inventory as well, to help with collecting some data and getting contributing what we can to some of these mitigation plans. And that's something that I had discussed with Mitzi Elks going forward, that possibly we could collaborate with the town and maybe do something with the village and the town together. It's a matter of funding. We got to put a grant application in, all that, the fun things, and really trying to understand like what our natural resources, where they are, what they are, how we can protect them, what value there is, the recreation versus utilitarian usage of it.
Right.
So these are all things that we're trying to do.
Awesome. We are about to be kicked out, I believe, but that was great. Thank you both, Kate and Katie, and hopefully, yeah, to be continued.
Thank you.
So I'm actually going to try to hop in on that meeting tomorrow morning at 9:30. I know that Katie and Mary, you have a scheduled meeting, so I'm going to see if I can make it for tomorrow morning as well. So I'll be a little more knowledgeable on what's going on with that too.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you, Katie, as well for jumping in here. It's really great to have you both on board. And yeah, hopefully we can make some good progress. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Do we have anyone? I guess we still. Maybe that's it. Okay. All right. Well, I'm happy to report from our group that I thought people did a great job. I know we had some newcomers and a few issues with some of the data, but I think everyone did a really good job. I feel like there was a lot of focus on cost savings and break even, and just focusing on the actions that really do save money over time, like EVs and an energy management system and LEDs that, you know, really pay for themselves, and, you know, honing in and emphasizing that point, both from like a fiscal conservative, answering the fiscal conservative perspective, and also some of the naysayers. I liked when people talked about relying on partners as well. You know, there's certainly partners out there that help with some of the actual implementation of some of these, and then also grant money available. You know, Westchester County has announced their EV charging grant program that's hopefully going to be announced soon, and things, other kinds of grant programs that people are relying on for funding some of these efforts. So yeah, I thought people did a really good job. How about other groups? Would anyone else like to report on their group activity?
I mean, I'll jump in. We did meet with the county and White Plains and Peekskill, and I think it was a useful exercise. We each kind of presented a little bit on what we were, you know, what we're thinking to present, and we got to field some fun, you know, simulated questions from cranky skeptics, from well-intentioned local folks, and sort of from out of left field, unrelated questions. And I think a good exercise.
Elijah did a particularly good job being a cranky community member, I have to say. One of my takeaways was the idea of addressing proactively some of the comments that you might expect to hear. So saying right up front that clearly the federal government and the global governments, there's work for them to do, but this is the work that we're doing here to sort of head that off, you know, right away. And also when Elijah was doing his presentation, he focused a lot on, or not a lot, but he mentioned the future generations, like we're doing this for our children and our grandchildren, and I think that's always a good strategy. So those are two things I'll take into my presentation. So thank you. It was definitely useful strategy, useful active.
And I think, and Judy did a very nice job sort of repositioning to say right out the beginning, like, here's what we found in the inventory report, and laying the groundwork to how does that inform what we're proposing to do as a climate action plan.
All great comments. Thank you, guys. What about the last group?
I think it's similar to the first one, with a lot of, you know, concerns from taxpayers about the cost, and so addressing that with grants and savings over time.
And I will say, I'm sorry, Nikki.
Go ahead. I'm done. That's fine.
Just that, you know, in doing our presentations, we got all these ideas from each other, so it ended up being like a resource share.
Yeah.
That's the idea. I hope we can learn from each other. And if there's any presentation that you guys want to share with the group, it's always really valuable to hear what others are doing, I think, and to, you know, to see presentations. I think these are great comments, and hopefully we can work on creating maybe a template stakeholder presentation that we can all use in some of these meetings in the coming month. All right. Anything else from anyone else? I know we didn't have any really tough sort of climate deniers, but you know, hopefully I like to think, knock on wood, in Westchester we won't see too many of those, but I'm always a fan of pointing back to the science, and have some few websites that I'll post on the website that you can always direct people to just kind of get the basics of climate change and understanding the science behind it. And you know, again, I think when you start talking about the future generation, and you talk about our roles and responsibilities, you know, that does kind of put things in a context which helps people, you know, really begin to bend to a degree before they even hear the ideas. And hopefully you want to put people in a state of mind where they're seeing that that there's only so much a local government can do, but it's a responsibility that's needed. And yeah, I really like the idea of just proactively taking on sort of the larger issue of climate change up front, and hopefully by creating the stories that Anne-Marie talked about in her presentation, that can help people really see it from an individual and a sort of a story perspective. And again, I guess studies have shown that does really make a difference in terms of opening up people's minds to change.
I was going to say about Anne Marie's presentation, I really like the I commit to, and I was thinking maybe doing something like this at a farmer's market in the spring and having already on Post-it notes some actionable items that people can do. Like somebody just was telling me, like, if I just charge my cell phone once every 3 days instead of every day, whatever, stuff like that. But like small steps that a person might be able to commit to, writing those all already on some sort of note so that people just have to stick that right on there. I commit to this. And yeah, I like that a lot. So
we did a really similar thing like that in Terrytown during our during Earth Month. Maybe we did it 2 years in a row, I think, ending about 2 years ago, where we put posters up, 3 by 2 foot posters in various places in the village with a little pocket that had sticky notes and a pen. And it was a picture of a tree, and we said, "Help Terrytown green this tree. Write down your intention for the environment that you will commit to, and stick the leaf." The sticky notes were with the shape of a green leaf, and people wrote on them, and they stuck the leaf on the tree, and we really got a lot of participation about that, and I think it helped raise consciousness. So a similar kind of thing like that for what would you want to see the village do for the environment, or what would you do it for the environment? Would be great.
Well, one of the things I was going to say, just in terms of dealing with skeptics, I've had some, I try to kind of make the point that, look, even if there's not global warming, we're going to still be, even if this is wrong, we're investing in things that'll help, clean the air up, reduce flooding, stuff like that, that's going to make our community better, and, spend some money. And the worst that happens is it's got secondary benefits. But, if you as the skeptic are wrong and this is happening, it's going to be way too late to do anything about it if we wait to do it later.
Yeah.
I think my biggest concern is that, I have these climate meetings every month already, and I do a lot of marketing on a lot of channels, and it's really just the choir showing up. Like, there's no deniers coming to these talks, So who are we going to actually get to our workshop? How do we get non-choir? How do we engage the larger audience? I have some ideas, but I welcome more.
Yeah, I loved Anne-Marie's idea about really reaching out to the youth, and I think the senior population too. They've been very active in Hastings as well. There's a senior council in town that's been fabulous, and I think oftentimes it is going to them, right? Because they're not coming to the events oftentimes. So
yeah,
it's also the time of days that we're offering them and the avenues that we're offering them through. Like for Austining, at least in the village, we have a lot of working people that can't make it during day meetings. We tend to hold a lot of day meetings. We do try to do them at night as well. And as Charlotte was saying, it's the choir that's showing up. It's the same people. We have to reach out further. We also have language barrier issues. So we have to be able to speak to a very large Spanish-speaking population, and we have a large immigrant community, and some of them don't realize that their opinions and their voices and what they're looking for with climate change and it impacts them. They don't necessarily realize that they can actually give their opinions and that they can be heard and be taken seriously in part of the conversation. So it might not even be that they have to necessarily show up physically present for all the meetings we have, but we should at least maybe explore online options, go through the schools. A lot of the schools, especially in Austining, we do a lot of community things on Saturdays. We have a lot of teacher meet and greets with the parents and activities that go on. That could be a great way. And kids love, you talk to them about the environment, talk to them about nature, talk about all these different things, and you can relate it to something that taps into them. They spread that message to their parents.
Yeah. I had another question, which is that right before this was the community meeting, the community greenhouse gas inventory workshop. And they were giving examples of public outreach, and they very much did outreach on both the municipal and the community greenhouse gas emissions at the same time, which I would want to do. I know this, what we're talking about here is muni, but obviously it's more engaging to the community if we're talking about their own direct impacts and choices. So I just want to run that by you guys and make sure that's okay if I'm hoping to do it all at once.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, we're doing that in Hastings too, combining the municipal and the community greenhouse gas inventory and sorry, in the climate action plan. So I feel like that does make a lot of sense. You know, I think it's important to realize, like, if you're just doing one, you know, you need to sort of sometimes an additional burden to really educate people on what the difference is. And sometimes it doesn't seem that important to people, kind of the difference, right? So they want to talk, as you said, Charlotte, more about their own experiences and what affects them. That's why I don't think the outreach from a CSC perspective for the government operations climate action plan is as intense. It's not as the requirements aren't as arduous, so to say, for the government operations, because I think there is that understanding that people will want to be much more involved when it comes to the community CAP.
I just had a thought, which is to go back and look at whoever's worked on historic comprehensive plans and visions for the community, that kind of thing. Those guys could be also great stakeholders.
Great idea. All right, well, we should, for time's sake, move on, but this is a great discussion. Thank you guys so much. And now I'm going to turn it over to Caroline, who's going to be talking about reduction measure modeling in ClearPath.
Eston, you're up.
All right, thank you, Mary. I think I hear some background noise, so if everyone could mute themselves, that would be great. All right, so I'm gonna have to speed through a little bit quickly today so we have time for questions. But basically, Terrytown gave me the go on using them as a guinea pig, so I did some emissions reduction modeling in their account, and I'm using it to show you all what you could use that modeling activity to help communicate your climate actions and your strategies to your different stakeholders. So with that, I will jump in. The agenda for today, I'll be going over just a quick review of our greenhouse gas inventory, and then I'll show you the analysis we did on emissions in terms of business as usual, so projected emissions to 2030 in the case that we do nothing. So no climate actions are taken, no strategies are implemented, just what our emissions will look like between now and 2030. And then I'll dive into some reduction measure analysis focused on our two biggest emitting sectors, followed by a conclusion and some time for Q&A. So diving right into our emissions inventory, just as a quick overview and reminder for those who are less familiar, our total emissions for 2019 were just over 1,200 metric tons of CO2e. Our highest emitting sectors are highlighted here with these yellow arrows. You can see buildings and facilities are the highest, followed by vehicle fleet and our employee commute. So those are some sectors we want to focus on as we're thinking through strategies, and they'll be highlighted throughout the rest of this presentation. So just another visual so you all can get a sense of how much of the pie these sectors are contributing to our emissions. You can see the two highest are about 2/3 of our emissions, maybe a little bit more actually. And then our employee commute is almost 1/4, and the rest are probably under 10%. So good to keep in mind when thinking about our high impact actions. And so diving into our high emitting sectors, I wanted to showcase what exactly is driving our emissions within our buildings and facilities, since it is the highest emitting sector. And this graph is showing just our total greenhouse gas emissions from both electricity and natural gas, the only sources of emissions in this sector. And you can see natural gas is by far outpacing electricity in terms of total emissions. So I did a little bit more analysis and found that natural gas in this sector alone accounts for about 35% of our emissions. So quite significant, and definitely a good thing to, again, keep in mind as we're going through high impact actions. So diving a little bit deeper into our buildings and facilities, I took a look at which buildings and facilities are the highest emitters, because you might want to, gives you a sense of where you might want to start in terms of climate action and strategies. And we found that our DPW is the highest by quite a bit. It's almost double our second two highest, which are Village Hall and the library. And moving right along into our vehicle fleet, which is our second highest emitting sector, I created the same graph, so just showing total emissions from our two sources of emissions within this sector, and you can see gas vehicles are outpacing diesel, not super significantly. So, you know, good to focus on gas, but diesel is an important factor as well. But with that, I did want to take a moment to recognize that diesel vehicles at this point are still a little bit behind in terms of electrification technology. So it's really good to focus on gasoline for the time being, and then maybe we should reevaluate in a few years as electric versions of diesel vehicles become more available. So moving along a little bit deeper into our vehicle fleet, I wanted to see which departments have the most emissions, which are driving the most, which should we maybe focus on at first to reduce our emissions. And you can see that the police department, unsurprisingly, and DPW are the highest by far. So it might be easiest to start with those two departments or even just one of them and kind of use them as a guinea pig, you know, working with one department rather than all five in terms of switching to electric vehicles might be a good idea here. So moving along, I know I'm throwing a lot of data at you right now, and I apologize. I will reserve time for questions at the end. But moving into our business as usual forecasting, which, as I mentioned earlier, is just a projection of emissions to 2030 if we do nothing. So we don't switch to electric vehicles, we don't electrify buildings, or take any other climate action. And so I'm going to take a moment to explain this graph because it will be different versions of this graph will be shown throughout the rest of this presentation. So on our left axis here, we have total greenhouse gas emissions in terms of metric tons of CO2e. Oops. Sorry, something weird was going on. So, so on the left here, we have total emissions. And then on the bottom axis, we have our different years. So starting in 2019, all the way annually through 2030 at the end here. And then at the top, we have this 1,200 number is, again, our total emissions in 2019. And then this blue line is representing our total forecasted emissions, which this business as usual forecasting activity resulted in a little bit of a decrease down to about 1,100 metric tons of CO2 in 2030. And then just to orient yourselves a little bit more, the different colors on this graph are showing our different sectors. You can see our highest emitting sector is buildings and facilities, shown in yellow, and our vehicle fleet is this darker orange, shown, in darker orange here. And then, so I just wanted to cover a few of the growth rates that we included for this analysis. So this is a high level analysis. There are a lot of assumptions built into it, but it can still give us a sense of what emissions might look like in the future, which is helpful for any planning purposes. And it's really the backbone of the strategy reduction measure analysis that I'll go over in a moment here. So a few of the growth rates that are impacting this forecast include grid decarbonization. So what our electricity supply is going to look like in 2030. That's whether it goes from more fossil fuels to less fossil fuels and more renewables. It's kind of taking that clean or dirty electricity into account. And then we also use the Westchester County population projection. Ideally, we'd look at employee count specifically, but that's a little bit harder to project. So it was easier to just sort of assume that as our population grows, so will the services that we provide, which means our emissions will also increase with that. And then finally, we also take into account federal vehicle efficiency standards. So the federal government comes out with requirements on new vehicles and how efficient that they have to be. As we move through time, technology improves, so we can assume efficiency will improve, and vehicles will have to follow these federal regulations. So all of that is kind of showing why we have a slight decrease, but clearly it's not significant enough. And so the last thing I want to call out on this graph actually is this dotted line is showing, the green dotted line is showing our 2030 reduction goal, or CLCPA's 2030 reduction goal, I should say, which I'm going to skip a few slides just for time's sake today, but yeah, this slide has our actual goals from CLCPA, which are a 40% reduction by 2030 from 1990 levels, and then also an 85% reduction by 2050. So that's the 2050 goal is the red line, and the green line is the 2030 goal. So one to definitely keep an eye out for through the rest of this presentation. Okay, I'm moving very quickly with a lot of data, but the rest should continue to help tell that story. So moving into our reduction measure analysis, I think this is the fun part. So I started with modeling a rooftop solar array, and I wanted to start with a little background on, why I chose to model solar at the library. So if you'll remember, looking at the inventory detail I provided earlier, the library was a pretty high emitting building. It was number 3, which, why wouldn't I do number 1 or number 2? Well, I decided to then look at its electricity consumption compared to other buildings. So we're not having the natural gas skew that data. So once I looked at that, I realized that the Village Hall is actually number 1. But when I went onto Google Maps, I found that it already has solar on its roof. So I decided to model for the library, the second biggest electricity consumer. And conveniently, it also has a flat and large roof. So it felt like a good one to use it as an example today. And I just want to call out that, this analysis, it's helpful to show what solar can do in general. It doesn't have to be specific to the building that it's actually feasible on. It could just be an example of, what solar might do to your building and facility emissions. So I used the PV watts calculator tool to estimate the system size. And again, you can see it does have some equipment that might get in the way of solar panels, but it's still a good estimation, and we could assume that maybe some solar panels could fit on this side as well. So that's kind of the thinking that went into this. I just think it's good background to have. And then moving on to the results of this analysis. So here is our business as usual graph again. You'll notice it doesn't really look any different, but I promise this does have the solar array included in it. And so these numbers I've added here are 498 is the total emissions for buildings and facilities in 2019. And then this 521 is actually what our projected buildings and facilities emissions are based on the business as usual scenario in 2030. And this new 517 number is our emissions with the solar array included. And unfortunately, it only shows a reduction of 4 metric tons of CO2e, despite how large that rooftop is and how large that system is. So, a little bit disappointing in terms of emissions reductions, but it does give me a good opportunity to highlight some additional considerations for solar. And this, again, could be at the library or elsewhere. So some co-benefits of solar include the potential for cost savings. Rooftop solar typically does have a good return on investment within its lifespan. It's a 20-year lifespan, but it could pay itself off within 7 years, for example. We'd have to do a little more analysis, but that gives a good reason for it. It also can provide some energy security and reliability. So what do I mean by that? I think a good place to start with that is, as our community electrifies, we are going to be putting more strain on our electric grid because our demand for electricity will be rising. So by installing things like rooftop solar, we can kind of support our grid and put less strain on it because our building could be consuming more electricity from that solar array rather than from the grid. And another piece, if we were to install rooftop solar, we could add some battery storage, which would give us great resilience. So if the grid went down, our building could still resume with, activities as usual and have power. So those are a couple big things to keep in mind. And then one more I want to mention is that if we do install some electrification measures like a heat pump, the installation of rooftop solar could also mitigate the need for an electric panel upgrade, which can also be really expensive because some electric panels can't support the addition of new electric loads on buildings. So quite a few considerations for solar in addition to some emissions reductions. And so despite, with that being said, I wanted to look at what other actions I could do that might have a bigger impact on emissions. And so I moved into building electrification. And again, similarly, I started by looking at the highest emitting building, which in this case, as a reminder, was the DPW by quite a bit. So I decided to measure just that building as its own, if we were to electrify that building by 2030. And then I also decided, it did show some reductions, and I'll go into that in a second. But because it didn't show a ton, I decided, what if we electrified 100% of our buildings, just to kind of show you all what impact that has. And so here are the results of our DPW electrification if we were to do this in 2026. And again, we have that 498 is the total emissions from 2019 from our buildings and sectors. And then this 397 is our new reduced emissions or total emissions in the building sector in 2030. And so we get 124 metric tons of CO2e reduced from our 2030 projected, which results in a 10% reduction in total emissions. So that's pretty significant, I'd say, coming from just one building being electrified. But clearly it's not enough to meet our goals. So we want to start to think about other actions that might help achieve that. So that's why I decided to show you 100% building electrification. So that action was taken in 2029. And as you can see, this actually resulted in a total emissions of just 121 metric tons from our buildings and facilities sector. So that's 400 metric tons saved in 2030. That's quite significant. And that results in 33% reduction in total emissions. So also really exciting to see that if we were to do all of that, it could help us achieve the CLCPA goal. Now, I'm not saying you're going to electrify all of our buildings by 2030. That is likely not feasible, but I just wanted to show that, through a combination of this high impact action and maybe some others, it is feasible for us to meet our goals. And so what other actions might we take so we don't have to electrify every single one of our buildings in the next 6 years is moving into our second highest emitting sector, which is our vehicle fleet, as I mentioned earlier. And so, I kind of outlined why we want to focus on gasoline right now. Hopefully we'll move on to diesel in the next few years, but for right now, let's focus on gasoline and our two highest emitting departments. And so I modeled what if just 20% of police department and DPW vehicles switch from gas to electric by 2030. And results are okay, but a little bit minor. And you can always bump up 20%. This is just an example, but we end up with about an 8% reduction from that action. And you can see the dip here. I just feel like it looks a lot less significant in terms of total emissions on the graph. So with that, I decided, what if we kind of similar to our building electrification, just what if we did 50% of our gas vehicles? And that bumped us up to a total of 30% or 13% reduction achieved. So quite a bit more significant. And, if you remember, the diesel was still pretty significant in terms of vehicle emissions. So you can see a pretty big drop from 421 to 255 for vehicle fleet, but yeah, it's about a 13% reduction. So with that, I come to a little bit of a conclusion. Clearly, electrification of buildings and facilities and vehicle fleet can have a significant impact on our emissions. We can meet our targets, the CLCPA 2030 targets through these actions alone, but we might want to use some additional ones to supplement and kind of mitigate the need to do maybe more than we can handle by 2030. And then finally, rooftop solar, while it does have a smaller impact on emissions when compared to electrification, there are a variety of co-benefits that we should consider as we develop our climate action plan and determine our high impact action strategies. And with that, we have a little bit of time for questions. Mary, maybe we don't, because we also need to.
Can I get a copy?
Yes.
I've copied all the slides off, Elisa, so I can share that with you.
Yeah, no,
That
I
was
think we
great.
have time for a few questions.
I just have one comment, and that is when on the first slide that shows the, if you can go back to the, no, sorry, the first slide that shows the yellow and orange and green graph. Yes,
As usual.
keep going. This one. Okay. So when I saw that and it said, and I saw with reductions applied at the top, I thought, wow, that's not very impressive. And I wonder if you could make it more clear that this is kind of like this is before you apply the things you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, I probably should have just added a title up here. This is a graph pulled from ClearPath, and ClearPath assumes that you've applied reductions in order to include the reduction goals. So it's kind of a funky thing, but yes, that is a great point.
During this, it's a great process. Was there any consideration given to energy efficiency measures within the existing building? Insulation, air sealing, that sort of thing?
No, but I mean, I would say start with efficiency always. I just didn't do that for this presentation to show you all kind of those other high impact actions. And typically these actions will have a higher impact than efficiency actions do. But obviously we should always start with those because again, as we electrify, we're going to put more strain on the grid and efficiency will help mitigate that as well. And I would recommend you all include that as well. This was just, I didn't have time to include too much. So, yeah.
So they don't lend themselves necessarily to such high level, quick and dirty analysis because every building is different. You're starting from a different baseline.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and Caroline, if I'm not mistaken, the reductions that you were showing in the fleet efficiency could be either improving the efficiency of the vehicles or reducing the use of the vehicles for that matter, right?
Yep, yeah, definitely.
Caroline, this was really interesting. I think in particular the solar, I think, you would expect, I would think a solar array to have more of an impact, and the fact that it was just such a small percentage reduction.
Yeah. Just covered it over with white box.
Was kind of interesting. Also,
It's great. It's like data-based action. I mean, it's
yeah,
a good thing and convincing. If you go through this in your communications efforts too, it'll demonstrate credibility.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and my hope is that using this sort of communication style could help, tell the story to your police department on why you want to focus on their vehicles first. And maybe that's a bad example, but that type of scenario is where this data can be really useful.
Yeah, we've gotten we've heard a lot of pushback about police vehicles because of, I don't know all the details of it, but the reliability of being able to gas up, or I don't know all the details. So I think I would, in White Plains, not be as specific. I think I would just go to like 50% of the fleet as opposed to picking on a particular department. And I love all of the detail and all of the graphs. I guess my concern, and we're going to be presenting to our Common Council in February with some help from Mary. And my concern is losing people. I mean, like, I feel like we have been steeped in this through this cohort that we've been working on, and it all makes sense to me now, or more or less makes sense to me now. But I just worry that I'm just trying to figure out a balance between communicating what I need to communicate to get people on board without losing them. So I guess that's just going to be that's like an art, not a science, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point, Judy. And I did want to say, with this presentation, I knew that you all were my audience. And what I wanted to showcase was how you could show this data, but it might not make, because there are a lot of different ways you can show this data. So I was trying to show a few different ways, and how you might communicate solar versus vehicles. So I definitely think a lot of what Anne Marie was saying speaks to what you just said, in that think about your audience, and you probably don't want to throw this many graphs at them. Definitely not all at once, but it depends on your audience. So yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I would, yeah.
It's like, I don't think we'll go into specific buildings at that meeting, because I don't want to start debating this building over that building. I just want to get consensus that, yes, we agree, we need action,
Yeah.
in buildings and fleets, boom,
Yeah, and the buildings versus departments is a little bit, it's kind of solely dependent on the data that you have. Some people just entered total electricity from all buildings or total natural gas. So it would be a little bit harder to model that anyway. But I think it depends on who you're talking to, because one way to mitigate that too, over the fight over which building, is maybe you don't label the buildings. Maybe you say, look, we have this building that's much higher, or we have this department, but we're not calling them out yet. We're just noting that we do have some higher emitting buildings or departments. Yeah. But yeah, you all should definitely take into consideration who you're talking to, and you definitely don't want to offend anyone, because this could offend some people. I just wanted to showcase again, how you can look at this data and use it.
Yeah, I was going to say too, Caroline, I really like how you mentioned the co-benefits when you talked about the solar installation. So even though it was only 4 megatons of CO2e in savings, it's it's important to look at energy security, reliability, and resiliency. So it's a great opportunity to bring up those terms and to explain them, and to kind of talk about why solar is important from those perspectives. So we only have about 5 minutes left. I do want to just get to the homework and a few announcements. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to end it here, but to be continued. And thank you so much, Caroline. That was really, really interesting. So now I'm going to share my screen, and we'll just quickly end with next steps. Oops, that's not it. And we'll definitely we'll talk about this more at the next meeting, which will be in early January. Okay, let's try this. So I think the most important announcement is that CAPI Adapt is on. So I believe almost all of you are going to be a part of that cohort. It's starting up in late January or early February. So look for a doodle poll coming soon with some potential start dates. The initial workshop will be an all-day in-person event. So it's really is important that you all make it. And it will include both the climate vulnerability assessment and the climate adaptation chapter. And then lastly, homework. We're going to obviously, continue on with what we've been doing. So finalizing the reduction measure modeling in ClearPath, and please speak up like Tarrytown did. If you want help, you saw that, Caroline can do some really amazing work for you in ClearPath. And if you do need help with that, please let us know. Also finalizing recommended strategies, and holding your stakeholder meetings will be important in the coming months. We are hoping to have a draft action plan by the end of January. And at that point, we're going to start, hopefully, having people present on their climate action plans for the last 3 months. We'll also have a guest speaker in January. Bronxville is going to be presenting on their climate action plan and implementation of it. So that should be interesting. And then, yeah, lastly, our next meeting is on Thursday, January 4th. It will be virtual. Because of the holidays, our last office hours will be this coming Tuesday at 10 a.m. So please come, check in, let us know how things are going, what we can help with. If you have any questions on CAPI Adapt, I'll send the website address out again, but feel free to show up and ask those questions on Tuesday. And that is it. Thank you so much, Caroline, again, and to all of you, and happy holidays, and we will see you in January.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.